Good evening, and welcome to another in the series of Blaylock Lectures as part of the 2020 ICPSR Summer Program. We hold these lectures in the evening during the summer program to honor Hubert Tad Blaylock, who was an official representative from the University of Washington to the consortium and also served on the consortium council. We have a series of lectures. We've been having them on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings all through the sessions. And we have a kind of a thread of presentations that have to do with forecasting elections, estimating election outcomes, because in the United States, this is an even-numbered year, divisible by 4, which makes it a presidential election year. So we've had presentations about pre-election polling and about exit polling. And tonight we're very pleased to have with us Mary Stegmeyer, who is going to talk to us about forecasting elections. Mary Stegmeyer is an associate professor in the Truman School of Public Affairs and interim vice provost for international programs at the University of Missouri. Her research on elections and voting behavior in the United States and in Europe has been published in a variety of political science journals. Dr. Stegmeyer currently serves as chair of the American Political Science Association Political Forecasting Group and as an associate editor of the International Journal of Forecasting. So it's a pleasure to turn control of the screen over to Mary Stegmeyer for her presentation, Citizen Forecasting, the Formation of Voter Expectations and Their Aggregate Accuracy.
Good. Thank you, Mike, for the delightful introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening to talk about my research on citizen forecasting. I want to give a shout out and a big thank you to my co-authors on the research that I'm presenting today. First of all, Mike Lewis-Beck, who I know is joining us in the audience, who has contributed so much to the field of election forecasting, and I've been fortunate to be working with him on research for many years at this point. Also, this research has been done with Andreas Murr, Deborah Leiter, and Erica Rascone. As I go through the presentation, I'll make note to you as the audience of the sources for this research. So just a quick overview of what I plan to talk about today. So first, I'll talk a little bit about voter intentions. And I know you've already had a lecture about pre-election polling, but I'll reintroduce this and point out some of the shortcomings of using vote intention polls for election prediction. I'll then turn to the topic of today's discussion about citizen forecasting. This is also referred to as voter expectations, where we're asking citizens who they think will win the election. Then I'll turn to why this is a very accurate approach to trying to forecast elections. I'll look at the theory behind it by examining how citizens form their predictions. And this will be done looking at a case study of Germany in 1990. So note that I'll be talking about Germany. And then we'll look at the evidence of citizen forecasting, evidence from my research with Andreas Murr and Mike Lewis-Beck on the UK. So in this research, we'll look at comparing the accuracy of citizen forecasting to vote intention models. And we'll also show our forecast for the December 2019 UK election, where we used the citizen forecasting approach and turned out to be extremely accurate in that forecast that was published prior to the election. And then I'll wrap up by saying a few words about possible avenues for future research. So first, let's take a look at vote intentions. This is a vote intention poll from mid-July. The source is YouGov, and it's for the US vote intentions, asking people if an election were held now and the Democratic nominee was Joe Biden and the Republican nominee was Donald Trump, would you vote for Biden, Trump, another candidate, not sure, or I would not vote? So here we see Biden is in the lead, Trump behind with 40% support. But then there is a group of people who say they'll vote for someone else, another group that says they're not sure how they would vote, and a small group that said they would not vote. So one of the
Mary,
issues is, yes?
I'm sorry, but I don't think we see the slides,
Oh, I see the slides.
but the sharing screen part at the bottom.
Yeah,
I can see the slides.
You see my slides?
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay, so, yeah, sorry. Should I just continue if some of you can see them?
Yeah, just go ahead. We can see
Okay.
the slides.
Okay, so I'll pick up again where I was discussing US vote intentions. So the challenge here is we have some people who say, a good portion of people who say they'd vote for Biden, another portion that said Trump, but then there's another 10% where what do we do with these people? How do we handle these responses? I also want to note that this survey is of registered voters, but we know that not all registered voters are actually going to turn out to vote. So this is another source of error in terms of predicting an election result. Another example is from the UK. And here, this is also July vote intentions. If a general election were held tomorrow, which party would you vote for? Here in the UK, we see that there are many parties that citizens could express a preference for. And when we look at this, no party has a clear majority. So it's unclear whether one party would win, whether there would be a coalition government, who ultimately would end up being prime minister. You'll note that in this survey, the responses are weighted by the likelihood that the person is to vote, and they've excluded those who said they would not vote, they don't know who they'd vote for, or refuse to answer. And so this, again, adds some possible error into how we are looking at and using vote intentions for prediction. So to provide a summary of some of the challenges in using vote intentions for predicting election results, we have the issue of who will actually turn out to vote. We are unsure, we don't know exactly how the undecided respondents will vote. Will they split in a way that's consistent with the people who have expressed a preference, or will they lean one direction or another? Another issue is, are respondents answering honestly? So there could be an extreme candidate that a respondent supports, but that respondent might feel that it's not socially acceptable to give that answer. So in the UK, there are examples of this, such as the shy Tories, supporters of the Conservative Party who might be reluctant to provide that as an answer for their vote intention. There's also the issue of using a survey a vote intention survey to predict election results, because some elections are not just based on the national vote. So US presidential elections, it's not just what vote intentions are or how people vote, it's also translated through the Electoral College vote that determines who actually becomes president. And we can look at the case of the 2016 election where Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but Donald Trump won the Electoral College. In parliamentary systems, seat shares are what determines which party has the opportunity to be the prime minister. Or in a case where no party has a majority, it is dependent upon coalition formation. So who wins is not always the candidate or party that does best in vote intention polls. So in our research, we've asked, is there another straightforward way to forecast elections based on surveys? And our answer is yes. The approach is using citizen forecasts. So what is citizen forecasting? We've just looked at vote intentions, asking people how they intend to vote. This reflects the individual's knowledge about one's own personal preference. When we look at vote expectations, or citizen forecasting, a typical question could be, irrespective of how you yourself will vote, who do you think will win the next general election? So who do you think will win is the voters' expectation. And this reflects the individual's knowledge about community preferences. So they're not thinking only about how they will vote, but they're thinking about all the other information around them that they're gathering about politics, talking to their friends, reading in the newspaper, listening to the news, their past experience and knowledge about politics in forming their own prediction of who will win. An example of how intentions can be different than expectations is here on this next slide. This is reflecting people's expectations of who will win the UK election in December 2019. This survey was conducted at the end of October, so a month and a half before the election. And you can see in the last column, the vote intentions. The Conservatives are ahead in vote intentions, but it's not a majority of the respondents. When we look at expectations, a pretty high percentage of respondents think that the Conservative Party will win. And the gap between Labour and Conservatives in this expectation is much larger. So we can ask, how does this compare to the results? So the results of the December UK election are at the bottom of the screen. We can see the vote shares. The Conservative Party did win in vote shares with 43% of the vote, but they won a solid majority of the seats at 56% of the seat. Labour, excuse me, further behind at 31%, the Lib Dems around 7%, and then other parties 5.3%. So why should citizen forecasting outperform vote intentions? So when you think about this, as individuals pool their information collectively, they will make better decisions than individuals acting alone. It could happen by chance that one individual is sort of the mean individual, the average individual, and this person is good at doing that. But other people in the group might not be. And what we don't know is which one of those individuals is excellent at this kind of prediction. So collecting information and looking at the mean very often performs better than looking at individual decisions alone. A classic example of this comes from the statistician Francis Galton, who was at a county fair in 1906, and he observed people who were guessing the weight of an ox and had the idea to gather all the guesses, look at the mean of them, calculate it, right? Calculate the mean. And it turned out that the mean was really quite accurate, within a pound of the weight of the ox. And this did better than individual guesses. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So how do citizens form their election forecast? We've talked about people using the information around them, talking to other people in a way that they're thinking about how the community is going to vote collectively rather than their own personal intention. So the next few slides that I'm going to talk about come from research that I've published with Deborah Leiter, Andreas Murr, Erica Rascone, and obviously myself, that looks at the role of social networks and citizen forecasting. This was recently published in the International Journal of Forecasting. So this comes from, we're using German data, which is why the German flag is here, but to sort of help you focus on the context that we're looking at. So there is previous research on how citizens form their election expectations. Previous research has focused on wishful thinking. This is essentially the hope that your party will win. So if I'm a supporter of the Libertarian Party and I am thinking about who might win this election, I might just simply say, well, the Libertarian Party is going to win because that's who I want to have win. So the individual's vote intention may weigh on their overall expectations of who will win. It may enter into that calculation. Political interest, so people who are more interested in politics are going to follow what's happening in the news. They might be more likely to pay attention to public opinion polls, to evaluate who's spending money on the campaigns, how persuasive political advertisements are. These kinds of things that they are following the political news and therefore more attuned and better able to respond to the question about expectations. Media attention will impact the accuracy of expectations. People who have higher levels of education may be better able to make these assessments or predictions because they're more politically interested, paying more attention to the media. Survey timing, when the question is asked, will affect how accurate people can be. If you're asked a year before an election or 6 months before the election, you might have a sense, but you might not be very confident. You might know that things are going to happen in the campaign that will potentially affect the outcome. So the closer you are to the election, the better people will be able to forecast, or the more accurately people will be able to forecast. And then other socio-demographic characteristics. People, for example, who are older might have more experience and better understanding of, say, the Electoral College in the US, and so might be able to better factor that into their assessment of who might win. These types of questions are pretty standard in national election surveys. So if a national election survey has a question, who do you think will win the election? We can pretty easily assess the impact of these factors on people's accuracy in their prediction. In our research, though, we're arguing that citizens also draw on information from their social networks, that individuals are embedded in communities, we have friends, we talk to them about different topics, and some of us also talk with people about politics. So if we are suggesting that people are, or if we're arguing that people are collecting as much information and using that to make an assessment of who's going to win, then including some measures of people's social networks, who they're talking to, might help us better understand how this plays into their assessment, as well as how it might impact the accuracy. So we consider some different hypotheses. So we suggest that the social network should enhance citizen forecast accuracy when the network is larger. So the more people that you're talking to, the more accurate your prediction will be. The more often you talk about politics with the people in your network, you'll be more accurate. And you'll also be more accurate if people in your network are perceived to be knowledgeable on political matters. It also matters the political leanings of your network. So if you are only interacting with people who share your view or who are only, for example, left-leaning, versus a group of people who have a variety of different views versus a group that is right-leaning, this is going to have an impact or can have an impact in how accurate you are. If your network, your social network, leans in the direction of the party or individual who wins, then this can enhance accuracy. But if your network leans in the opposite direction, this will hinder your accuracy. These kinds of social network questions are not typically included in a standard national elections study. So while we had been talking about different ways to try to assess the factors that weigh into people's assessments of who will win an election or their expectations, Deborah Leiter happened to come to the University of Missouri, the Columbia campus, to give a presentation, which I attended. And the data she was using for her presentation, which focused on social networks, but a different question than what we're looking at here, used data from 1990 in Germany. And it had a really neat battery of social network questions. And after the presentation, I emailed her and said, any chance that there is a question in your survey that asks, who do you think will win the election? And sure enough, she wrote back right away and she said, well, there is this question, which I'll show you in a moment. So we were set with an opportunity to test the impact that social networks have on voter expectations. It's quite rare to find such a survey with both the voter expectation question and social network questions. Though I will add that we have added this question or social network questions to some recent election surveys. The survey from Germany in 1990 had a total of 1,547 respondents, 487 of whom were from the East. This is something interesting to note because German reunification occurred in October 1990, and this election in 1990 took place in early December, so a couple months later. So East versus West, or citizens residing in the East versus the West, might matter for accuracy, so we also test that. Some specific questions that we use from the survey, the social network survey. And I present these here because I think they're interesting to look at and to consider. As someone who studies elections, before working on this project, I hadn't thought so much about how would you organize a survey to really tap into the characteristics of people's social networks. So the first question, which we use to calculate network size, asks people, who do you discuss important personal matters with? Looking back over the last 6 months, name up to 5 people. And they're asking people to actually name them. So I might say Sue and Mike and Joe and Ron and Jane. Then for each one of those individuals, they ask a whole series, excuse me, of questions. And we draw on just a few of those. So they ask for each of those individuals, when you talk to that person, how often do you discuss politics? How much do you think that person knows about politics? And which party do you think that person will vote for in the election on December 2nd? And they ask it's some additional questions as well, but this whole battery of questions for each of the individuals that the respondent names. So a respondent can name up to 5 people. They aren't required to name 5 people, and some people apparently don't talk to many other people. So 0 or 1 people is possible as a response. So the December election in Germany, just some context, vote intention polls showed a really wide lead for incumbent Chancellor Helmut Kohl's Christian Democratic Union Party. And this had been the case for some months before the election. So people who were really following the news should have been able to answer this question. And one of the things that we were interested in is this could be a really challenging case to study the impact of social networks, because if people are following political news, this would be a pretty easy election to predict. So do their social networks in this context actually have an impact? And the reason the public perceived, or the incumbent candidate, chancellor and his party were expected to win, is that the public perceived the Christian Democratic Union as the party best able to handle the economic consequences of German reunification. So the actual survey question, tapping into voter expectations of who will win, is who would you say will win the next general election? The CDU, CSU, or a coalition government led by the CDU, CSU? So this is Helmut Kohl's party. Or do you think that the Social Democratic Party, the SPD, which is the large party on the center left, or a coalition government led by the SPD? So they're essentially asking people, who do you think will be the party of the next chancellor after this election? We see the responses below. In the West, the western part of Germany, 75% of respondents correctly predicted that the CDU would win. And interestingly, in the East, the percentage is actually higher. So the East had been formerly communist, the fall of communism occurred in 1989. Recently, in 1990, shortly before this election, reunified with Germany, West Germany, but yet they're predicting at a higher rate of accuracy. And we see the difference is really in the don't know, where 16% of respondents in the West say they weren't sure, and in the East, that percentage was smaller at 9%. So we then develop a model to look at the factors that predict voter expectation accuracy, or the accuracy of their expectations. And we do this with a binary logit model, where we're looking at the correct CDU prediction versus all other predictions, which is for the Social Democrats, or saying that they don't, that they don't know. What we're most interested in our research is the social network characteristics. And so you'll see that I've separated those out from all the other control variables that I mentioned from previous studies. We look at East versus West to see if there are any differences. The person's vote intention, so this is the idea of wishful thinking, political interest, attention to news, education, age, the respondents' sex, and the number of days till the election, because the survey was conducted over a window of time. So our expectation might be that respondents who were asked the survey questions closer to the election might be more accurate. So let's take a look at the results. So here on this slide, I've presented the difference in expected probabilities for the logit model, the binary logit model that we have run. You'll see at the top of this graph are our social network characteristics. And what we're looking at is, as I said, the difference in expected probability of a correct Christian Democratic Union forecast. So we see, for example, if you look at the first variable on the list, network size. The way we can interpret this is when we compare an individual who has 5 people in their social network and compare that to an individual who has just 1 person in their social network, we see that the respondent who has 5 people in their social network will has a 15 percentage point higher chance of giving a correct or accurate prediction. And we can see that this is also statistically significant and lines up down here at the bottom with the probabilities. Network discussion, when we compare people who never talk about politics with those in their network to those who very often do, we see that they are also more likely to have a higher chance of giving a correct prediction. At the other extreme, we can look at people who are unsure of the political leanings of their social network, or those whose social network leans to the left. So Helmut Kohl and his Christian Democratic Party is a center-right party. So if your network is 100% left-leaning individuals, or that's how you perceive them, you have a smaller chance of being accurate. Or getting the prediction correct. And that is a 16 percentage point smaller chance, to give you a sense of the impact that the political leanings of the social network can have. When we look at the control variables, we also see, as we would expect, people who have high levels of political interest have a higher chance of issuing a correct expectation or forecast. We also see that people who say that they are planning to vote for the Christian Democratic Union will be more likely, have a greater probability of being accurate than people who are not voting for the CDU. And undecided voters, perhaps because they're more open to information, are also more likely to give an accurate prediction for this election. So what have we learned from this? What can we say about the factors that impact the accuracy of voter expectations, their citizen forecasts? So political interest, a vote for the winning party, and those who are undecided in their vote choice contribute to more accurate forecasts. But also, social network characteristics matter. So we saw that network size and how frequently people discuss politics with those in their network improve their predictions. And that network ideology also has an impact if it's left-leaning or unknown. So left-leaning meaning in the opposite direction of the party that won, in this case, they hinder an accurate prediction. So all of this confirms that citizens consider information from others who are in their community when answering the question, who do you think will win the election? So now I'm going to turn to the evidence that citizen forecasting is an accurate strategy for election prediction. And I'm going to do this in the context of the UK and by comparing vote expectations, citizen forecast, to vote intentions and vote intention models. This is work that I've done with Andreas Murr and Mike Lewis-Beck, and we're happy to say that this is forthcoming in the British Journal of Political Science. It's available online at this point, but we're still waiting for it to be published in print. Some factors to consider, just general factors when we're thinking about election forecasting, principles to keep in mind. One, we're interested in accuracy. We want our forecast to, for sure, identify the winner. The closer the forecast is to the actual seat or vote shares, whatever we're trying to predict, the better. So accuracy, we want to know who wins, but we want it to be also as close as possible to the outcome. Lead time is another factor. So the further in advance we can predict, the better. If we make a prediction the day before the election, then that's almost a trivial thing. But if we can predict a month or 2 or 3 in advance of an election, then that's quite an accomplishment. The challenge is that there is a trade-off between lead time and accuracy. I mentioned before, when we're interviewing or surveying voters, the closer we are to the election, we expect them to have a better chance of being accurate. So the challenge with election forecasting is we want to have a decent lead time for it to be interesting, but we also want it to be accurate. And we're more likely to be accurate the closer we are to the election. So finding the balance between lead time and accuracy is something that all forecasters consider. Also, straightforward models, a parsimonious model that is intuitively easier to understand, where there aren't lots of mathematical manipulations that are happening in the model. This is just in general better to understand what is actually happening with the model, what factors are coming into play, and this can also facilitate replications and reproducibility. So this is the last point on the slide. So can people replicate this if they're following the research that you've done in your description of the modeling, as well as, is it cost prohibitive or not to replicate this? So in the case of using vote intentions or voter expectations, of course we need survey data to do this. So there is some cost to that in gathering data. Our analysis, as I mentioned, focuses on the UK. We're comparing voter expectations and vote intentions. Our data set that we compiled covers the time frame from 1943 to 2017. And what we've done is we have collected voter intention and voter expectation polls from this time period. And in order to do the comparisons, we need to have months in which both vote intentions and expectations were asked of survey respondents. So in this time period, there are 449 months where we have both vote intentions and expectations. So these months can be anywhere in the inter-election time period. So if an election is in 1983, then we have some months that could be in 1984, 85, 86, leading up to 1987. The surveys that we have also cover all 19 elections between 1950 and 2017. So as a first pass, we can ask, how often were the polls right? How often were the voter intention polls correct? And how often were voter expectations correct across these months that we've compiled? Voter expectation polls forecast correctly 72% of the time. So this also, just keep in mind, 72% of the time is a really good number, because some of these polls were taken 3 years before the next election. This is certainly better than chance, say 50-50. So voter expectation polls were at a correct rate of 72%. And then when we look at the voter intention polls, they're correct 62% of the time. So even when we look at this most basic pass at the data, we see voter expectation polls are outperforming vote intention polls in correctly predicting the winners. So what we do to compare the model accuracy is we are using out-of-sample predictions to assess the predictive power of voter expectation models. So now we're moving to models, and comparing that with 7 different vote intention models. So models, election forecasting models that use vote intention survey data. So these are predictions that are out of sample, and when we are looking at their accuracy, comparing their accuracy, we are estimating those models only with the data available at that point of the election that we want to predict. So it's as if we're going back to, say, 1987 and trying to predict who is going to win that election. So we're not including data from the 2000s, for example. Then we compare these predictions to the actual result of the elections. And we're considering, did the model correctly pick the largest party? And also, how close was it to the actual seat share? So we're looking at the error. In terms of forecasting with voter expectations, the way we're doing this is we're regressing the seat share on the lagged seat share and voter expectations, and we're doing this separately for each political party. So when we analyze these, the accuracy, what do we see when we compare the voter expectation model, our model that we've created using voter expectations, to the models that rely on vote intentions in the British context? So when we look at all of the elections in this time period that we're using our model to predict 1987 to 2017, our voter expectation models correctly predict the winner 80% of the time. And this is better, as you can see, than the best voter intention model, which correctly predicts 73% of the time. The worst is at 50% of the time. And then our model, the voter expectation model also does really well when we're looking at the mean absolute error in seat share. So we see that that is the lowest at 3.9%, where the best voter intentions model has a mean absolute error at 4.9%. Below this, we do another comparison. So in the UK, constituency boundaries are redrawn from time to time. And some of the voter intention models can only be run when the boundaries are the same, when the districts are the same, to give a comparison to the US. Because some of the voter expectation models rely on the previous vote share in that constituency. So if the boundaries have changed, then you can't use that as a predictor in the model. So when we look only at elections where there are constant constituency boundaries, the voter expectation model happens to perform perfectly. And the best voter intentions model is correct 85% of the time. And you see in this last column that when we look at elections with constant constituency boundaries, our mean absolute error in seat share is lower at 2.6%, lower than it was when we looked across all elections, but it still remains the lowest of all the models that we're comparing. So we put our forecast to the test. Our article was accepted at the BJPS prior to the December 12th, 2019 UK election. So we used that approach to publish an article, a blog post at the LSE on this. But first, to give you some context, on the eve of the election, actually the morning of the election, The Economist magazine wrote, "There is wide variation among pollsters. Some surveys suggest a Tory Conservative Party landslide, while others predict a hung parliament, which would probably lead to a coalition government but led by Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party leader." So it really wasn't clear the morning of the election what the result was going to be or who was going to be the next prime minister. This is a slide that I showed you earlier. So a survey that was conducted at the end of October on UK residents, looking at their vote intention and vote expectations, who they thought was going to win. And this is the survey that we use to create our forecast on voter expectations, based on voter expectations, but then we also compare that forecast to the forecast that the vote intention models would have issued based on these data. I will say that one of the challenges we had in this research was we found the survey in plenty of time before the December 12th election. This survey was conducted at the end of October. But we had hoped to find other surveys that we could potentially take an average of, or to consider vote expectations from something that's a little bit closer to the election. And we got to the point where we hadn't found anything, and we decided, okay, we're just going to go with this survey. But one of the things that we knew when we had generated a model and a forecast from this survey is our voter expectations model was nowhere in the middle of the pack of other forecasts that were being published, nor was it sort of in the middle of the pack for what the vote intention models predicted that we were estimating. So on this slide, you can see this table that we published in early December before the election at the LSE. Our expectation model predicted that the Conservative Party would win 360 seats. There are 650 seats total in the British Parliament. So we're predicting 360 seats for the Conservative Party. Not just a majority, but a good solid majority. If you look at that first column, the Conservative Party column, you can see what the other voter intention models predicted. The seat share, the number of seats for the Conservative Party ranged from a low of 289 to a high of 355. So we are above that. Our Labour estimate of seats was 190. And this is below what the voter intention poll models were predicting. So we felt like we were very much going out on a limb, that we could be completely wrong, but we only had one survey at the time that we could work with in terms of having the voter expectation question available for our estimation, our model estimation. So how did we do? So same slide, except I have posted the election results at the bottom. So you'll see that the result of that election was the Conservative Party won 365 seats. So our model, which we were maybe a little bit worried that it was a little bit too high on the Conservative number of seats, was actually really, really correct. We ended up being just 5 seats off, and far closer than any of the other models. And you'll note that some of these models, the last 3 on this table, predicted that the Conservative Party wouldn't even have a majority, that no party would have a majority, that there would be a hung parliament, or this last model predicted that the Labour Party would actually have the highest number of seats, but not a majority. When we look at the Labour Party seats, we also came pretty close. We were a little bit low, but still did well. The number of seats is 202. We did really well in predicting the Liberal Democratic Party's number of seats, and did fine on the others. The key is that the voter expectations model is really the most accurate in predicting the winner's seat share and the number of seats that the party won. So we're quite proud of this prediction. When we compare it to other predictions and forecasts that were published at the LSE prior to the election, ours also did the best and was most accurate among those. So this tells us that there is value in looking at voter expectations, that the media, if they want to think about or talk about who is likely to win, that's another question in addition to vote intentions that they could look at. And vote expectations is a more accurate way to look forward and try to predict what will happen in an upcoming election. So as we consider avenues for future research, so the first point is there is a need for regular public opinion polling on voter expectations. It's not a question that's asked in all democracies or by all polling companies. So for this to become a useful tool or strategy for election forecasting for the media to use, for political pundits to use, it needs to be a question that's regularly asked in polls. There's also plenty of opportunity to test voter expectations and citizen forecasting in countries with different types of party systems, institutional structures, or electoral rules. There's also the opportunity to test this in different types of elections. So we've been looking here at national elections, but the approach can be used to forecast local elections, state elections, referenda. We can also consider systems where it's more complex to translate votes to seats. So does this hamper citizens' abilities to predict who is going to win an election if the seats to vote or votes to seats translation is more complicated in certain electoral systems compared to others? And another area of research is, well, our work on the German case and the factors that influence citizen forecasting accuracy focuses on interpersonal social networks. It was in 1990, so Facebook, for example, didn't exist at that time. We might consider surveys or introducing questions into surveys that tap into online social networks and how those might impact citizen forecasting accuracy. So before I close, I thought I would say a few words about the American Political Science Association's political forecasting group. So if you are interested in political forecasting, if you're interested in election forecasting, or any other types of forecasts that are looking at political events, whether it's wars or predicting protests, predicting regime change, or the methodological approaches to forecasting, to political forecasting, I would encourage you to consider participating in the political forecasting group. We're a related group of the American Political Science Association. We host panels and roundtables at the annual meeting. And if you're doing research on this, please submit to our related group section in the future. We welcome participants to our business meeting. It's a great way to network and to meet some others who are working in this field. We also have a presence on Twitter. You can follow us on our Twitter account at POL forecasting with the number 4 in the middle. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Ruth Dasonneville and Charles Tien, who are guest editing a symposium that will be published at PS, Political Science and Politics, on the 2020 US presidential election forecasts. It's a special symposium and will be published online prior to the election. So if you're teaching classes, if you're interested in this research, this is an excellent resource for you to take a look at. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. It's been fun to talk about this research, and in preparing this presentation, it's also been great fun to return to some of these topics that we have published, but also to consider other ways to move this research agenda forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary, for a very interesting and stimulating presentation. People who are in the audience can address questions to Mary through either the
Oh, Mike, I think that your mute went on.
Struggling with my laptop this evening. Thanks for a very interesting presentation, Mary. And I'm encouraging the members of the audience, the participants, to ask questions through either the Q&A or the chat function in Zoom. And we have some questions already. But maybe, Mary, you could say a couple of words about the special issue of PS and its history.
Yes, I'm happy to. So for many elections, both congressional elections as well as US presidential elections, PS has published symposia on the election forecast. So there are a number of scholars who use different modeling approaches to election prediction. For example, political economy models, citizen forecasting models, models based on vote intention, models based on primary election results, time for a change, so a pendulum that swings back and forth between the parties in the US. So there is a long history of US election forecasts being published in PS prior to elections. And we're delighted to have, I don't know the exact number, 14, 17, something like that, forecasts that we expect to be coming in to Ruth and Charles in the coming weeks. I think they're due in early August, and they will go through a peer review process. It will be an expedited, quick peer review process, but they do need to be vetted before they are published online, and they should come out in sometime in October. So if you are interested in different approaches to US election forecasting, this is a great resource. Plus it's interesting to see what the forecasts are and to compare them. And then ultimately to see how well they fare on election day.
Thanks. I think that's very useful. Not everybody in the audience is a political scientist or would be regularly seeing PS, so this is a handy reference. So now we have some questions from the participants. Would you expect that vote expectation could be used to predict whether or not an electoral college misfire might happen? Might there be a threshold of vote expectation percentage at which an electoral college misfire would be more likely to happen?
So that's an excellent question. And maybe if I think about it, one way we could ask that question is not necessarily who do you think is going to win the election, which is an interesting question, but we could also say, do you expect that the electoral college vote will not match or align with the popular vote? So that's a question we could ask people. And if people are analyzing the political situation and they see maybe vote intentions are quite close, we might say, okay, well, in this particular question on a misfire, do you expect this to be two different results in the popular vote versus the electoral college vote, if we see a high percentage of people saying that, this is something that we could model. We don't really have a history of this question though, so it's hard to actually model it, but it could be an interesting question to look at. I will say that the 2016 presidential election for everyone was a tricky election to predict. Mike Lewis Beck and Andreas Murr and I did an MTurk survey on voter expectations prior to that election, and we used American National Election Survey data from previous election years to try to create a model, to model and predict the electoral college vote. And the challenge is you can get to the national vote share, but going from that national vote share to the electoral college vote share is a tricky thing to do. And so our prediction was wrong on the electoral college vote share. We've looked at the CCES survey from 2016, where there was a question as well, who do you think will win? And that looks quite similar to the results we had in our MTurk survey, where pretty overwhelmingly respondents were saying that they expected Hillary Clinton to win and not Donald Trump. And so in really close elections, even if people are paying lots of attention, they can end up incorrect. Now, with that said, of course, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. I might point you as well to another website. Andreas Graf is part of the Polyvote group. And if you go to the Polyvote website, it's polyvote.com, it's POLLYVOTE.com. He has YouGov data for this current election season in the US on voter expectations. So I was looking at it recently, and you can see it's pretty close in what Americans are saying. The percentage predicting Biden will win compared to Trump. The most recent one, survey, last week, I believe, Biden was ahead with 50.6% of people saying that they thought he would win, and 49.4% saying they thought Trump would win the election. So it is quite close, but it's also focused on the vote share. But on that page, Andreas Graf goes through his model and how he approaches this question.
This is an interesting and important question because many political scientists are writing about, for example, the imbalance of representation in the Senate now in relation to the population distribution in the United States. And of course, in 2 of the last 5 elections, someone has occupied the White House who didn't win a majority of the votes. So there's a sense in which, as you pointed out in one of your early slides, that the relationship between the popular vote and the Electoral College summaries are breaking down.
Yes. And I wonder, you know, as I've thought a little bit about this recently, I wonder if we could begin asking people the question, who do you think is going to win the Electoral College vote? Prompting them to think about how the Electoral College works. And people who follow politics closely may then recognize that there are certain states that lean quite heavily in the Democrats' favor or the Republicans' favor, and that ends up not being well reflected in national vote shares. But it is a challenge in the US system.
We have another question from a participant. I see that citizen forecasting works. Under what conditions do you think it would not work?
Mhm. So maybe that ties into what I was just talking about in the US election, that in elections where the vote is really close, if information is either not widely available or largely biased, if we've looked in some other work that I've done with Deborah Leiter and Jack Riley, we've looked at accuracy in forecasts and how if people are in echo chambers, if they are only interacting with people who share their political views, how does this impact their accuracy? We can also think about, are there strong partisans who are living in echo chambers, who aren't really paying attention to national polls and are only reading media consistent with their views? These are people who are probably quite likely to be incorrect, potentially incorrect in their predictions, especially if their perspective is not the political leaning or ideology of the candidate who ends up winning the election. So I think that there are, when we look at individual citizens, there are certain characteristics that will make citizens more amenable and accepting of different kinds of information compared to individuals who are receiving information from just one perspective.
Was citizen polling done in the 2016 election in the United States? Curious if the media and polling that showed Clinton would win caused citizen polling to break down.
You know, I think so the answer is yes. We did. There are some surveys out there, the American National Election Survey, the CCES. We did our own MTurk survey. And given what we know from, say, the German example I gave you, if people are paying attention to politics, people who have political interest, if you were following the 2016 presidential election campaign and the media commentary on this, I think it's reasonable for people who are highly politically informed, who follow politics, who are paying attention to polls, to have that impact their expectations. And my own sense from that election is the result was a surprise to me and to many other people. And so then when you look back, why was it a surprise? What was it? Was it the public opinion polls, the vote intention polls that we were viewing in the media, the commentary, the lack of focus maybe on the effect that Trump had on mobilizing a group of voters who might not otherwise typically turn out to vote in an election, but maybe also not paying enough attention to particular states, because obviously the states matter in the Electoral College and it's not just the national vote. So how the media talk about national polls versus the Electoral College, perhaps a focus more on the states would be beneficial.
Do you think that network characteristics such as intensity or strong and weak ties will make a difference in voter expectations or in how well the forecasts work?
Yes, this is something that we have talked about. We have not analyzed completely at this point. But we have looked at, say, independent voters versus voters who identify with a political party. And as you might expect, independent voters are somewhat different in how they form their expectations. So there is this, if you lean toward, or if you identify with a political party, this is going to inform to some extent how you answer this question, but it might also be impacting, if you're a really strong supporter of the Democratic Party or a really strong supporter of the Republican Party, the media you are listening to might be left or right-leaning media. The advertisements and materials that you're getting in the mailbox, that you're getting in your email, that you're seeing on social media might reinforce your positions in a way that it might not have that kind of impact on people who are more moderate Democrats or Republicans or independents. It's a good question for future research, I think.
In the work that you did in Europe, could you say a little more about why you think that the other category was not as accurate?
Yes, so looking at the UK, there was a lot of volatility in the 2019 election with the new Brexit party. UKIP was another party. Obviously, then there are also regional parties like the Scottish National Party that will do well. It will run candidates obviously only in Scotland, but it may be more difficult for a cross-section of the whole British population to predict how well that party will do, these smaller parties.
What is your feeling about how or whether these techniques handle the case of people giving deceptive answers or lying better than other procedures?
Yeah, so as I mentioned when I was talking about vote intentions, suppose someone supports, say, the Communist Party, but you might not want to reveal that to someone. You might be a little bit self-conscious or feel like that's not an acceptable answer, or you might really not intend to turn out to vote. Maybe you've not regularly voted, but you know the socially acceptable answer, if you're a good citizen, is to say, yes, I'm going to turn out to vote. So when we're talking about intentions, we're relying on people to reveal something about themselves and hopefully to be truthful about that. But it's easier to talk about, what do I think society is going to do? I might have my own view, but I don't have to reveal that when I'm talking about everyone. So it is, in my view, more likely for people to say, yes, this is the party that I think is going to win, even if you don't think that that party should win or is an acceptable party to be in office. It might be akin to asking people, you know, how much alcohol do you drink, or do you do drugs, versus asking people, what percentage of the population do you think drinks alcohol or uses drugs? That's an easier answer to give because it's not reflecting on you as an individual, but it's reflecting on society as a whole.
Maybe we can conclude with actually what is a statement for your commentary rather than a question.
Sure.
A model that can perfectly predict the popular vote and the Electoral College vote outcomes in 2000 and in 2016 is the holy grail of American election forecasting. So what do you think the prospects of that are, Mary?
I think it will require more work. I it's hard to go back in time and create new surveys to be conducted back in those election years. But I think there's a chance, right, that we will have some more elections in the future that we can be better prepared for with the kinds of questions that will help us better model US elections, both in terms of the popular vote as well as the electoral college vote, which is what ultimately selects who the president will be.
So with that, I want to thank you again for a very interesting and stimulating presentation. Very good questions from the audience. And good luck with your research. Will you have an estimate in the PS in September?
I don't have one right now. I'm a full-time administrator, so I am doing research still, but it's hard to do on a timeline. But I do know that my co-authors, Andreas Murr and Mike Lewis Beck, are working on a citizen forecast that if it's done in time and goes through the peer review process, will be out before the November election. So
Great.
We'll see how it does. Thank you everyone for the super questions, and good luck as you forecast, and I encourage you to participate in the political forecasting group at APSA if you're interested in this kind of work. So thank you for hosting me. Thank
you very much, Mary. We have another presentation tomorrow evening. We have a panel of ICPSR official representatives who are going to talk about organizing for teaching the first time or the second time, how to prepare a syllabus and organize materials for your class. So that'll be the topic for tomorrow. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you, everyone.